Now, here we have a chance to encourage everyone to wear shoes when they are outside walking in the grass or on the soil, because there are nematodes that have infective larval stages in the soil, and hookworms are a good example of those types of parasitic worms. Decatur americanus is the species of North American hookworm, but there are many other types of species and genera of hookworms all over the world. Now, in the United States, you would find hookworms more likely in the soil where climates are warmer. And as it turns out, the adult worms deposit the infective larvae in the soil. As you walk through the grass or soil with bare feet, the larvae burrow through the skin, pass from the bloodstream, migrate up to the lung, get coughed up into the digestive tract where the adults mature in the intestine. The larvae can get deposited through intestinal feces in soil, and then contaminated soil is where we would find the larvae emerging and getting a chance to get back into an animal through their skin. Now, in other parts of the world, outside North America, hookworm is a huge problem. In fact, continents where we have the highest prevalence of hookworm would include sub-Saharan Africa, the Far East, including parts of China, Malaysia, and even South America, and the central interior near Brazil. There are vaccines that are now available, and of course, decreasing the prevalence of hookworm would be of huge importance to other parts of the world. Once the larvae of hookworm migrate through skin, especially in the feet, they often get lost. Their ability to track or determine
where the larvae are migrating. You can see the tracks as the larvae migrate through the dermis, trigger an inflammatory response, and you can see the red tracks. Patients even report sort of observing, they could mark on their skin and observe the progress or the movement of these larvae. Of course, initially, the patient doesn't know what's moving through their skin until they get a proper diagnosis. But larval migrans can occur not only in the skin, cutaneous larval migrans, but there are some types of nematodes, like hookworm, that can wind up creating larval migrans in the eye and all kinds of other body sites, depending upon where these lost, wandering larvae wind up. As you can see from the pictures, not only do you have the larvae migrating through the skin, causing inflammation, burning, itching, patients report they just want to scrape the skin right off their flesh. It also encourages, unfortunately, secondary bacterial infections. You can see in a couple of the photos, the lower one and the one on the right-hand side, there's some evidence of some pussy or purulent material accumulating in some of those tracks, and you can see sort of a complication with bacterial infection along with the larvae.
Here are some photos of essentially how the hookworm anchors itself into the lining of the intestine. Notice that they're thoroughly embedded into the intestinal lining, and in order to eliminate the hookworm, we have to make certain that the entire adult is destroyed or killed to confirm that the patient has gotten rid of their hookworm. It's estimated that the infective rates have actually increased, especially in terms of populations where population densities have dramatically increased. So the infection rate is now estimated to be about 1.5 billion people worldwide, or 1 out of every 5 individuals on Earth are predicted to have infection with hookworm. Here's another example of a nematode that can cause us problems when we ingest the infective larvae in undercooked meat. Trichinella spiralis is the cause of trichinosis. Trichinosis can occur in pigs and in humans. And in fact, that's how we manage to acquire the parasite, by ingesting pork or ham from a pig, and that meat is not cooked thoroughly or hot enough to kill any possible infective larvae that would be in the skeletal muscle from the pig. These little larvae form little tiny packets in the muscle. They're microscopic, so you can't
see them in the meat. Of course, if there was something wrong with the food, you wouldn't eat it to begin with. So you have to realize all of these infective helminths are microscopic. Microscopic eggs, larvae, and so this is what happens if we ingest undercooked meat, especially pork, that has encysted worms in the flesh of and from the animal. That meat gets into our stomach acids. Unfortunately, the worm has adapted to the human digestive tract so that our stomach acids uncover the cyst and even release the larvae from their little encysted casing that was originally in the food. These larvae migrate into appropriate areas where they prefer to grow, and the larvae also can be released from the females and start to move and migrate to our muscles, where they too coil up into little cysts. Our immune system tries to cover them up with calcium and other materials, and we wind up with larval cysts in our muscles.
Now, the infective larvae that go to our muscles, if we've ingested pork that was contaminated with trichinella, are from the adults that wound up in our intestinal tract. So we don't simply go from larvae coming through the stomach and then migrating always to our tissues. Instead, often the infective larvae that we ingest wind up in the intestinal tract, maturing into adults. Those adults release eggs in the intestine that hatch and turn into infective larvae, and that's how they migrate from our intestine to our skeletal muscle. Now, trichinosis can be very painful depending upon how many encysted larvae you have in your muscles. As you can see in some of these photos and illustrations, we have in the top photo numerous cysts in a piece of skeletal muscle. A close-up in the middle shows us one single larvae that's coiled up in this little cyst casing. And the cyst casing is actually composed of numerous white blood cells that we call eosinophils that are particularly targeting parasites. In fact, one of the normal functions of eosinophil white blood cells is to eliminate parasites. Then on the outside of all of those eosinophils, the body deposits oftentimes a calcium-rich dense material that forms a covering or protective sheath over this infective larvae, trying to separate the larvae from the rest of your body. In the bottom photo, you can see how this larvae essentially naturally coils or curls up into a little package when it's in the larval stage. Here's an illustration of the trichinella life cycle. Notice that for this particular species, the diagnostic and the infective stages for humans are the same. Now, historically, human beings have ingested the infective larvae of trichinella from undercooked ham or pork. It might be one of the reasons that there are various religious groups that have public health laws that prohibit the ingestion of meat from pigs. This slide illustrates the clinical progression of trichinosis when a patient has become infected with the larvae. Notice we have a variety of different types of analytes as well as clinical symptoms and signs that can be evaluated and give us an idea of at what stage the infection is, weeks after ingestion of the infected meat. This also includes where we have symptoms occurring with the acute phase and the various stages of essentially incubation, prodromal, and the acute phase where we have the pinnacle or peak of symptoms, as well as the length of time it might take to convalesce from infection. Notice that we can have fever, muscle pain, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting are oftentimes the first signs and symptoms. That progression leads from the diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting to the muscle pain and the fever, and even inflammation and conjunctivitis in the eye. Eosinophilia starts to increase, or the percentage of eosinophils
that accumulate in and around the parasite as well as circulate in our bloodstream, giving us our first clue that we have a parasitic worm. Not all eosinophilia occurs in helminthic infection, but if you do see a high percentage of eosinophils in a patient's blood sample, then that is a good indication that they have helminths. Then we just have to figure out what kind. Also notice that as the larvae start to infect the muscle, we start to see more and more muscle damage and the release of an enzyme that's called CPK, creatine phosphokinase. That's due to muscle damage. As we have increased muscle damage, depending upon what muscles are infected, we might even see that the patients do get so sick that they might die from this infection. It does happen, even though the percentage or the mortality rate is not extensively high. You still don't want to run that risk. So it's always a good idea to thoroughly cook all meat, regardless of what animal source it's from. And don't rely on smoking or any kind of smoked or pickling process to presume that that's going to kill any of the parasites.